And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 242. Today is a feedback session. Robert and Viji have both sent in images, so we're going to be looking at how I can best help them to improve those photos. So if you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment down below, click subscribe, say hello, tell me what the weather's doing, all the usual kind of stuff, and we can make a start. So yes, and welcome to episode 242. As I say, it's a feedback session today. And of course, like I say, if you are watching live, then say hello. If you're not watching live, but you're watching the recording, you can still leave a message. I just won't get it immediately to be able to respond to in this video. I would like to say it's fairly obvious, but it's not always obvious. Occasionally I do get left a message from somebody who thinks that it is still going out live, even though it was recorded maybe several months ago. Never mind, it's all part of the rich fun of the human experience. Anyway, we have... I see we have people in already. Let's make a start with that before I dig myself too big a hole. Robert says, howdy from Cloudy. Howdy all from Cloudy, Texas. Nadia says, hi everyone from a very sunny Fife. April says, greetings from a sunny and warm Long Island, New York. Susan joins us from a warm but suddenly cloudy Kirkcudbright. Actually, yes, I mean, it's been beautifully sunny all day here in Castle Douglas. The sun's just come out again, but the cloud it's possible it could rain, even storms for an hour or two this afternoon. Whether that's going to happen while we're live or not, I'm not entirely sure. But at the moment, I'm lit by the window there where the sun is out. If it starts getting too dark and dull in here, it's probably because it's clouding over. John says hello from a lovely day in mid-Ohio. Marilyn joins us from chilly Colorado. And Viji says good evening from Chennai in India. Excellent. So we have people. We have a topic. So yes, today then is a feedback session. So what happens is it's your chance to send images in and get genuine feedback from a professional photographer. With photography, always we have our own blind spots. Now, part of photography is using our own eye, our vision of what feels good to us, what feels interesting, why we're pursuing it. And that can be unique and individual to each of us. But for the same reason, we sometimes kind of get stuck. We know it isn't working, but we're not entirely sure why it isn't working. And so much of that is some of it's to do with maybe our skills or understanding of what's going on maybe hasn't reached a level that's to keep up with our desire to create the image. Sometimes it's just the fact that we are blinded by everything else that's going on. So at the point we take the photo, we are aware of the sounds, the smells, the noises, all the stuff that's happening out with the photo. All the other busyness, all the other distractions, even our thoughts, our mood, what we had for dinner, whether it's grumbling away in our stomach as we're trying to take the photo. All these things contribute to what's going on at the point we go click. And so when we look at the image, we also tap into all these other physical, sensory, emotional memories at the same time, which can make it very, very difficult to have an objective view of our own image. And this is the point where feedback from somebody else can be absolutely invaluable. So there's very few places where you can get genuine feedback without having to pay a whole chunk of money for it. But here, free on Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres is one of the places you can do it. So periodically I give over these podcasts specifically to feedback sessions, which I have done today. And Viji in India and Robert in Texas have both sent in images, which I'm going to be looking at. So that's what we're going to be dealing with today. Before we make a major start on anything though, a quick update on the Smug Points situation. Well, currently, Anne and Amanda are both sitting on 30 Smug Points each, whereas everybody else is on 10, 5 or none, depending on whether you've left any comments. And that's for May. Now, actually, at the end of it, this is all going to change. So if you are lurking at the moment and haven't commented, get your comment in to get that extra 5 Smug Points, because it might tip the balance, because Viji and Robert will both get a bonus of 25 Smug Points for submitting an image today. Because that's the way the Smug Points work. The Smug Points work on this idea of contribution to these podcasts. And if you submit an image for feedback, which I then use, which then helps everybody else who's watching, you get a bonus 25 Smug Points. If I do a challenge, and there's currently the Light and Shadow challenge I set last week, which will be coming up in 2 weeks' time, you get 10 bonus Smug Points if you put an image in for that, if you submit an image for the challenge. But you also get 5 Smug Points for leaving a comment live here now while we're going out. So all these things help to kind of add to the richness of these podcasts, and you get awarded the Smug Points. And then the bonus for the person who wins the most Smug Points at the end of the month is they get to choose the following challenge. Now, this month, there's only one more Sunday after this one, which is next Sunday, where there won't be a podcast. So I'll say a little bit about that again at the end of the podcast, where I tell you actually what is going on about Spring Fling and the amazing event that is happening around southwest Scotland, which is why I won't be having one next week. But it does mean that the challenge for Light and Shadow, or Shadow and Light Photo Challenge, which was set last week, episode 241, if you want to go back and check, submissions are to be in for the podcast that will be on the 1st of June. Make sure you get that in a couple of days early. Again, I'll remind you about this at the end of the podcast. Oh, Meg's joined us and says hello everyone as well. Okay, so where are we going to get to there? Oh, a little reminder, yeah, if you can click like on the podcast, that's always useful. Helps helps YouTube know that somebody's watching it and actually approves of it, and who knows, they might even show it to somebody else. And of course, if you haven't done already, then subscribe, hit the notification bell, all the usual things as well. And oh yeah, Susan and Meg are saying hi to each other. Okay, so let's make a little start then. And we'll start then with Robert in Texas, who sent us, now I just have to go and double click on that one, I think. Yes, there we go. And flick over to this. So this is Robert's picture. And Robert says, I took this photo on February the 19th, 2022. So just 3 years ago. I took at least 896 photos that day. Oh, not so many for you, Robert. And at least 99 came out quite well. That's not a bad hit rate. What's that, about 1 in 9? 1 in 9 success rate? Yeah, that's commendable. You've got to be happy with that. You have critiqued several photos from that day, right? Okay, so you've built up a big stock, which has been sort of slowly been drip feeding into these podcasts over the last 3 years. This one I really like because the subject has a mirrorless retro camera. She may be a street photographer herself. This image was taken from a cafe Anne and I stopped in to get a bite and warm up. Paris is my favourite city for taking photos, which actually reminds me, if anybody else, all of you who are on Photocrowd at the moment, I see Robert has just set up a Photocrowd competition for Paris, France. So if you happen to have ever been to Paris and you've got some photos of that and you're on Photocrowd, then don't forget Robert's competition there. Take a look out for it. Go to the competitions and contests and community contests and what have you, and you'll find you should find that one for Paris, France. So that's Robert's. I think it's a crowd judged only one rather than a Robert judged one. So trying to bribe him or anything won't actually make any difference to whether you win or not. But there is an option there if you have any Paris photos going into Robert's competition on Photocrowd. Right, that plug aside, Robert goes on. I like the mood of this picture, but I'm not 100% satisfied. I'm hoping to gain some insight from you on how you would improve the quality of the edit. Okay, so what Robert has done rather nicely, which is what I usually ask people to do, is he has sent me the RAW file, which is always a good idea because sometimes when you see things in the RAW file, it gives you a different sense of how you might have laid out the photo. Robert says, thanks for the plug. So let's see, let's take a quick look at this photo then. We've got a young woman there. She's got a camera in her hand. She's got this wonderful pink and green scarf, car parked in the background, zebra crossing running diagonally behind her. She's looking into the back of the camera, and Robert has square cropped it. Now, And judging by what Robert said here, it's actually taken through the window of the cafe that he and Anne happen to be sitting in, getting out of the biting cold of Paris in February. So we've got this picture, we've got this work. The thing that strikes me straight away, though, with this, the focus is on the woman, but that car sitting behind is very dominant, and it sort of runs into the back of her head. And obviously, when you're sitting in something like a cafe, you don't have a chance, and you're doing any kind of sort of street photography, observing everybody else, you kind of tend to be grabbing whatever you can in that moment. There's not a lot of option to, because by the time you've moved to a slightly different angle, or you've waited for something else to change, other parts of the scene have changed. So you tend to be very limited on it. Now, so the question is there things we can do to mitigate that? Because I do tend to feel that that car is just a little bit too dominant in this photo. Another aspect to this is the colouring, I think, feels just a little bit too over into the yellows. And I can't help but feel if you did an auto colour correction, it would probably blue shift it slightly. Certainly the coldness of Paris isn't there at all. I suppose it doesn't really matter. There's nothing else in this picture to say it's that seasonal, beyond the fact that the woman is wearing a woody scarf. But all the same, her skin seems sort of slightly yellowish. I think that everything's got a sort of slight yellow hue to it. Now, again, these can always be slightly to do with the screens we're looking at as well, but I would kind of toy with that. However, I think what we need to do is let's take a look at Robert's raw photo and see what we've got with this. So if I double click on that, here we can see then the raw image, and now we can actually make out much more about what's going on. The yellow isn't quite as intense, which makes me think that's probably come through then a boost of the contrast. If I take the contrast and I boost it, you see everything becomes a little bit more yellow. So that sort of slight yellow shift has happened within the editing process. We can see that there's more going on. So the crop has come in much more closely. We've got the car, but we've also got a crossing going on over here. We can see the little green, probably a little green man saying it's, or something like that to say that here's where the crossing is. Or it might even be a light in the window behind. We've got an HSBC, so we've got the bank there as well. We've got somebody in the background. We've got other bits and pieces that happen to be on the street. And actually, I think what strikes me here is that there's much more of a street scene going on. And I quite like once you've got more of the street in, that car feels much less dominant. Having said that, obviously then the focal point, the woman, also isn't quite as dominant. But there's something I quite like about the whole body language. When we are in here, it's very much about the face looking down at the camera. But there is something also I quite like here about the way the legs are walking, the hips, there's a slight bend in the knee, there's a slight sort of, there's an S bend here. You'll see the scarf comes round like this, and then it kind of comes back in with the bend of the knee. That's something I quite like about actually when you get the whole body in. And when you get the whole body in, the car doesn't seem quite as dominant either. So let's just do a very, very basic before I do anything else. I'll just take the highlights down a fraction just so I can come back in and don't blow anything out later. Shift the shadows up a touch just as a kind of slight thing. The ISO is 125, so I don't think I'm going to need to worry about playing around with noise or anything like that. F1.2 on a 50mm. Strange, I would have thought the background would have been more blurred with something like that, but again, depends on you're using your R5. But anyway, that's kind of what we're in. In an ideal world, I think I would have liked to have seen that background slightly more blurry. But we'll maybe come on to options with that in a moment. Let's just open this photo then and see what we've got. So what have we got? Oh, April says, I do like the shot of the woman. And Robert says, sure is an S-curve. I never noticed that. Okay, so let's do a little bit of, first of all, let's just straighten this. So now there's not a straight horizon. So, I mean, that line there looks flat. And if I flattened it to this bit, everything else goes wrong. So what we do is we move it to line up with the verticals. Now that vertical's moving slightly to the left as that was slightly to the right, so we sort of grab probably the edge of this building here, or between that building and this pole, and we just kind of straighten it up there. So now we've got the straightening here. Now we've cut off little bits and pieces, so I think we can come down. I want to get her shoes in. We don't need so much of this bit of wall. Now what Robert did was he came in to remove that bit of pole. that to me feels like I actually kind of want, you know, I'm getting drawn to the notion of the more kind of cinematic crop with this. I think if you bring this down here, you take that out here, we bring this over here, you could even have that person walking in the background here. It was then diagonally across the road from your key subject and actually ends up as like a little bit of an echo. So let's actually just pull that out a fraction more. Now I know we're going to end up with a couple of little extra spots here, but that's okay, we can fill those in a moment. And then maybe we could even bring that down a fraction more, something like that. And or we go down even further and the car becomes maybe less so. I'm tempted. I think I would play around with this a little bit more, but I'll maybe bring that down a fraction, something like that. And then how's that looking for a crop? Well, now we need to just fill in these little bits. And I think if I probably spot healing brush, chances are will probably give us what we want. I just do that. Yep, that seems to join the lines up nicely. Because there's nothing particularly complicated beyond just extending a little bit of pavement or a little bit of straight lines. Sometimes the spot healing tool will do the job. Actually, if you use generative fill for this, which can do a job in a more complicated place, but one of the problems with the generative fill is that it quite often is a lower resolution. So if you sort of zoom in, what would happen is you would find it suddenly got blurry there, whereas with this is kind of okay. There's a little bit of was that already there? Yeah, it's if I do that, yeah, that's okay. Doesn't matter, I'm kind of getting right. Don't get too lost in the details. So here we go then with a crop. Now, not completely cinematic, but more cinematic, more widescreen. And I quite like that. And at this point, I think it's okay having the pole here and it's okay having a bit of wall here. But we've now got much more of a scene. Now, it is going for a slightly different idea than Robert's original. Now, Robert was originally, essentially, I mean, this is another option. If your key bit is really about the woman looking in the back of the camera, you could just crop here, okay? In which case the car, again, becomes a lot less dominant. Because in your original photo, you've included the whole car, that car dominates as a kind of a major part of the photo, which it isn't. It's coincidental, it happens to be there, and I think we need to reduce its impact. So to come back to here, if your key part is about the notion of woman and camera, I would say you can crop into about here, and you maybe widen it or make it square, something like that. But having said that, you are, you know, at this point, we've cropped out 80 to 90% of the photo. So it would be fine at this level for, it's a little bit of a sharpening tweaks here, it would be fine for a web level photo, but you'd never be able to print it up. If you print it up for one of your camera club competitions, you wouldn't have the real estate, you wouldn't have the number of pixels you need in order to do something like that. However, but if you'll go back to this idea of thinking it's something you might want to print, if we go this slightly more cinematic crop, I think that's giving you something to print. Now, a little bit of extra here, back bumper of that car, I think I would just take that out. And that little green blob there is grabbing the attention, so I just remove that. And I think at that point, we're away from much more of the distraction. Now, question is then, is where we go next with this. Now, really, like I say, our key point here is woman in the scarf. And the rest of it is environment, is background, is playing supporting role to woman in the scarf. This car is still quite dominant. Now, maybe if I wanted to play, okay, let me just duplicate that layer. What I might do is I could use the generative fill to actually get rid of that. So go around here, get rid of the shadow. The tricky bit here is really where we're playing around with the edge of the hair. But let's just say we managed to do that, and then so generative fill. I can either leave it blank or I can put remove, something like that. Anyway, just generate. I'll put remove just in case it replaces it with another car, which occasionally generative fill can be extraordinarily annoying for doing that. You've got a cup on a table, you circle it to remove it, and suddenly it just replaces it with another cup. Okay, so that's removed it. It's given quite a hard line on the edge there. Well, let's just see what else. Oh no, that's a softer one, and that's another option. So just for that, just to sort of show you what it's like, and actually of the different options, maybe that one's given the best around the hair. Oh, I could do it again, could do other versions. But you can see now the difference between with the car, without the car. And you start to understand that that car is a distraction. However, we do potentially have a problem here in how are we doing with the edge of the hair. If you look, if we come in here, you see the hair is nice and detailed here, but as we come up to the back of it, here, it's very pixelated. Okay, so this is back to this problem of the fact that at the moment, at least with Photoshop, it's got a limitation on the resolution, and when you change the resolution in a high-res photo, you end up with a low-resolution replacement, which again, if you're getting to the printout point of this, will suddenly become noticeable. It's not noticeable in the background, that's being particularly different from any other bit of background, but that's because the background is blurred to begin with. But where you've got detail like that crossover with the hair, then it can potentially become problematic. So for those who don't have generative fill, or those who don't want to do it, let's go back to this and say, well, okay, we've got the car, what could we do with the car? And I think first of all, what we might do is even soften the saturation on it. Then again, let's think about this in a sort of slightly other way, which is potentially softening the saturation on everything but the woman. Let's come back to this. What we're wanting to do, the key point here, our bit is the subject is the woman looking at the camera. The street scene is there to support the context of the woman looking at the camera. But the street scene is there as a context, is not what we're looking at. We might casually move our eye across it, but we're not going to linger there for long. So actually what we want to do is we want to kind of remove our sense of the distraction and pull ourselves into this picture. So one of the things we could do with this, for example, is if I take the saturation, and actually I'll tell you what, before I get to that, let's come here. What I could do is I could select the subject. Now, if I just go subject here, hopefully this should select the woman, should make sense of it. Yes, it has. Okay. Then select inverse. So now I've selected everything outside the woman. And then if I take the hue saturation levels, I could just desaturate. Now, I don't want to do that selective color pop. It's just so cheesy, being done to death. I avoid that. However, if we just knock it back a fraction, just cool it off a little bit. Now, we're then sort of looking, we don't want to go full black and white. We want to still have some color in it, but not as much. So we're talking subtle edits here, but it does mean that because of the color of her scarf, the green and the pink, makes that stand out just a little bit more against the background. Okay, and what I might do for good luck is if I shift into, let's say we go to the blues. In fact, I will particularly take that one and desaturate the car a little bit more. Just go from that blues, and maybe we just make it grey. Take the colour out completely of that, and then that's one less thing drawing the eye. We could even come back to here. If I duplicate that layer and then invert that layer, so we've just got this one. Come back to wrong one. Come back to here. Go back to the default. You could even boost her. Now we don't want to do that completely, but maybe just nudge it a fraction up, and we get a little bit more colour, pink and green into there. So it's very subtle, but essentially if I group those together, you can see the difference. Let me just move in slightly closer. The difference between, it's soft, it's subtle, but it does make a little bit of a difference. Wouldn't make any difference in a crowd voted people scrolling fast on their screen. But if we're talking about, you were toying with the idea of printing this up, then I think we're into something. So let's put all that onto No, not that. Hold on. Select all, copy, paste. There we go. And we'll put that onto a fresh layer, and then let's now let's take it into Camera Raw and see what we can do with this. Now, what I might do, again, a little bit of a vignette, because what we're trying to do is draw attention to her. We're okay. I've said it's okay to have this pole here, but that's not the key aspect of it. So I'm just going to pull the edges in slightly. I don't think we want to go full in because that doesn't quite look right. Always with this, we're trying to kind of do it a little bit of subtlety. Okay, I'll hit auto, see what happens. No, not so keen on that. It kind of ups the vibrance a little bit too much again. So if I go over here, if I bring the exposure up a touch, highlights down a little bit. Now, if I play with contrast, I think that's maybe a little bit of overkill. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. 2 little levels. We've done the vignette. I'm going to click OK here. I'm going to duplicate that layer again so I can show you what's going on. I'm going to go back to the Camera Raw filter. And now we're going to go in closer and we're going to play a little bit more with that, the clarity slider, and maybe give it a little touch more texture in the hair. Now, what we're also finding is this sort of slight yellow sheen that I said about is happening a bit. So I'm just going to go to the color and just nudge the temperature just a fraction down into, well, not as much of it, -10, something like that. Now, it's also done everything around the rest of the photo, which is slightly more than I wanted. So all I'm going to do is mask this back in, and then essentially, where am I? Need that in black. And turn, well, no, I need to turn that white, and then just paint her in with this. Okay, and in fact, what I might do, because I think I prefer the colours of the greys, but we've lost a little bit. I quite prefer, yeah, maybe the slightly more peachy bit. Yeah, actually, I quite like that purple too. What about somewhere in the mid-range? 54, yeah, something like that. Just a little bit more colour back into the greens and pinks of the scarf, maybe the bag, and maybe her hair. Just kind of warm that up a little bit, something. And I think now what we've got is it's a much more subtle picture, but I think there's something going on with it. And, you know, so if we go back and we compare to your original photo here, now it feels like there's much more of a sense of overcooked, really, I think. You've taken the clarity sliders too far, the colours have become too punched. Because you've applied it universally across the picture, the car in the background is now really standing out. Whereas if we come back to here, it's... Now, you can take this and, you know, if you don't feel that's enough, you know, like I say, I think that would work quite nicely as a printed picture. There's nothing to stop you if you were doing this for crowd vote online effect. You could still come in here and you could then play around a little bit more, boost the texture a little bit more, boost the contrast a little bit more, take those highlights down a bit, shadows up, and kind of you maybe want something a little bit more like that to make it pop off the screen a touch. But I think if you were talking about printing, maybe you're not wanting that quite so much. So hopefully then, Robert, that kind of gives you a couple of ideas that when you come to taking a photo like that, you've got the photo, look at the whole scene, but then also it's understanding what's included in the photo, that everything you've got in the image is either contributing to or detracting from the image. And in your original image, that car was definitely detracting from it. Because that car was then, I mean, okay, there's, you know, just if we go back here just to show you, this car is taking up something in the region of about 20% of the photo. You know, 20-25% of the photo, which, given that the photo is really supposed to be about the woman, is just too much. Whereas the car's taking up much less of the photo, especially in the bigger street scene, especially if we can then bring our attention more by use of softening, desaturating slightly the background, boosting a little bit of contrast on the woman, making her stand out, but not to a point whereby it feels false. So hopefully then that gives you a few ideas. But thank you for sending that one in. It was an interesting photo. Robert says, not a bad removal of the car. And then John says, with hair or fur on an animal, do you prefer to add texture or reduce texture? Ah, okay, that's an interesting one. So that, well, I would say that depends entirely on the image and what you're doing. If you're doing, I mean, I've done this. Say you've got a close up of your pet dog or cat or something like that, where basically you've got the focus on the eyes, a little bit of fur on the nose and stuff, and then it sort of drifts out of focus. So if you've gone for a wide aperture, plenty of bokeh, narrow depth of field, at that point, if you start adding too much texture into the blurry parts, it gets a little bit overcooked and messy very, very quickly. Okay, so by and large, I wouldn't do too much on the fur with that. But I might boost it slightly in the place where it's in focus, okay, just to draw your attention that little bit more. So the outer focus part isn't getting touched, the in focus part is being sharpened a little bit more, so your eyes get drawn to the part of the photo you want the eyes drawn to. If you're taking a picture of, I don't know, a deer, a badger, a bear or something, and it's more kind of, it's one part in the context of a larger picture, at that point you might boost the texture on the fur of the whole thing, because you're trying to make the animal as a whole stand out against the background that it's up against. So I hope that makes sense, John. It's all to do with the context and how close in you are and what you're, well, ultimately it's about what are you wanting to draw your attention to. When we create a photo, we're looking at a key part of the photo and saying this is the primary area we want to draw the attention to. And then what tricks, what tools have we got in our editing box that are going to help emphasize that narrative? And if it's all about drawing attention to the eyes, or if it's all about drawing attention to the head, or if it's all about drawing attention to this particular figure or this particular shape, then what do? We want to draw the attention to it. And then we use things like, in our compositional terms, leading lines, use of light and dark, use of diagonal, all kind of ideas of bracketing and what have you in the compositional tools to draw our eye to the place that's important. And then in the editing, we do the same thing, only we have extra tools of the fact that we can blur out some parts, sharpen up other parts, darken down certain areas, lighten up other areas. Where are we drawing the attention to? Okay, and so the sharpening of something like hair or fur, if it's adding emphasis to draw the eye to where you want it to, then you go for it. If it's actually, you're trying to sharpen up a blurred area, you know, what's supposed to be a deliberately blurred area, then you don't. So hope that all makes sense, John. And Robert says, I like the subtle edits. It does look overcooked now that I've seen your ones. I will be working on it soon. Thanks for your insights and helps. Okay, well, great that you found that useful, Robert. Thank you. Okay. Where are we at? So, about halfway through. So, not that one. That one, yes. Little reminder that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and all the rest, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can support these podcasts. Don't forget to like your friends, click like and invite your friends, or invite your likes and click your friends, depending on what you find interesting. Yes, so there's that, and we have the Facebook group, we have the Flickr group, also Flickr or Facebook /groups/UPwKA, UPwKA, for Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, if you haven't worked that one out already. If you want to send me images, you can, for critique or for challenges, you can either put them in either the Facebook or the Flickr groups, or you can email me at kimayres.co.uk. So straightforwardly, kim@kimayres.co.uk. Just remember to spell Kim with an I, not a Y, and if you're spelling the Ayres, it's AYRES, not ERS. So generally speaking, where most things don't turn up in my mailbox is because somebody's put a Y or an R or something in the wrong place. I've only got 8 letters in my entire name. I have no middle name, and yet still it's too complicated for some people. Right, what else have we got? Okay, John says that makes a lot of sense. Susan says, I like your image, Robert. Great edits, Kim. April says, I typically like my friends. Oh, Oh, Kenneth has joined us. Hi, Kenneth. Kenneth Goodry says, how best to take pictures with a camera that does not have a viewfinder? How best to take pictures with a camera that does not have a viewfinder? Oh, now that's an interesting one. So, So do you mean like there's nothing, that you don't have something you can look through at all and you don't have a screen? So what are we talking about? Something like a pinhole camera? Or just a screen? Okay, so if you've just got a screen, let's consider for a moment. So I've got a camera like this, but imagine then we didn't have this bit, I've only got the screen. Well, use the screen. If you find that the problem is with the screen that there's just too much light coming in from other places. So you sometimes find that if you're using your phone, I mean, we don't have a viewfinder on the phone, so that it is literally just the screen we're going on. And sometimes on bright light, we can't actually see what's going on. So with cameras, depending on the make and model you've got, you can get little hoods. So it's like a kind of a little hood which kind of clips over it, and it creates a viewfinder. It allows you to look in, and it cuts out all the external glare from the picture. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is, it's essentially, if you think about like the people with the big old 10x8s on the stand and the bellows camera, they would throw a blanket over their head, and it's to get rid of all the external light. So you're looking for tricks to kind of get rid of external light. So it might be, if worst comes to worst, cup your hands. It might be that you get a hood specifically designed for your camera or your phone. Other than that, guesswork, squinting your eyes, doing your best, I guess. Okay, Kenneth says movement issues and blurry pictures. Yeah, movement, I mean, by and large, that's about keeping your camera steady. If things are getting blurred, there's two things happening. Three things, potential things happening. Blurry, either it's not in focus, you're focused on the wrong point in the image, or your shutter speed isn't fast enough for what you're doing. Either your hand is wobbling and your shutter speed isn't fast enough to counteract that, or the image is moving too fast for your shutter speed. So your shutter speed needs to be higher if you want to minimize the amount of motion blur that's going on. If you're using your phone, phones tend to be pretty good at automatically they do an awful lot of sensing it out and getting it right. If you're using something like a pinhole camera or something you've made yourself out of a shoebox, then by and large it's hold it as steady as you can, stick it on a tripod, rest it on a table, point it as best as you can, take your best guess. But understand that if the more things are moving, the more chance there is of you missing it if you don't have an accurate way of being able to line up. Okay, Kenneth says thanks. Interesting. Welcome to the podcast, and thanks for the question there, Kenneth. Okay, right, so let's move on then to Viji. So next up, Viji in India has sent in a couple of photos, and let me see if I can just find, there we go. No, not that one. That one, yay! So Viji has sent in two photos. She took this one and this one. So slightly, I think it's the same flower, fuchsia, is it? These ones are still budded, with this one just about to open, and this one is opened up, flower coming down, and rather interesting little insect sitting just on the flower here with really weird little antennae, feelers. It's not one I recognise. It's not something that's I would say that crops up in Scotland. I don't think I've ever quite seen a bug like that. So maybe unique to India, or unique to fuchsias, and we just don't have enough of them around. April says, love the insect. So, Viji says, these photos were taken with my bridge camera. Whenever I have the urge to get closer, I realise not having a macro lens is a huge disadvantage. This is when the bridge camera comes to the rescue, especially during outdoor shots. And this is true. We have our DSLRs or our mirrorless cameras, and unless you have a dedicated macro lens, generally speaking, there's a limit to how close you can get. it might, so a lot of lenses you can very rarely get much closer than about a metre before you're inside the zone whereby it can focus. And so suddenly you can't get as close as you would like. You can zoom in as much as you like, but you still got to be, anything from 60 centimetres to 1.2 metres, depending on your lens, away before you can be in focus. And even if you've got a high resolution camera, you end up cropping out an awful lot. So whereas bridge cameras very often have a built-in macro. They go from sort of macro right through to super zoom. So as a kind of a sort of jack of all trades, useful for almost any situation, bridge cameras can be quite good for that. So what Viji's saying is, I know Viji's got quite a good DSLR, but she will, for getting in the macro, she pulls out the bridge camera. So going on that, despite the lovely pink and green leaves, the photographs are still dull. What should I have done to add some pizzazz to otherwise dull photos? How could I have made these better shots? I know the images are abruptly cut, and I should have remembered giving them room to breathe. And that's always another thing, as we've talked about before, that notion of giving room to breathe, which is just sometimes if you're slightest bit uncertain, just shoot slightly further back than you think you need. What also difficult with a macro shot, because very often we're trying to get as close as we can. But the problem is it then throws out potential possibilities of composition. And if we're in just a bit too close, sometimes it's easier to crop in than it is to add imagery, bits of the image afterwards. Although that's getting better with things like generative expand and what have you in Photoshop. If you don't have access to this level of editing software, always better to shoot slightly wider so you can got better cropping options. Anyway, VG goes on to say, I wanted the flower to be in focus, and I wanted the stem and a few leaves to show the connection with the plant. Yet the photograph falls flat. It was a dull grey day. Can you let me how to shoot? How this shot could have been a better one? And what should I keep in mind while taking such photographs? Okay, so there's quite a lot going on here, but it's something that what's that? Robert says, I thought it was an elk or a deer. April says, a very shrunken one. Yes, that would be quite a... If that was an elk or a deer, then, I dread to think just how big that fuchsia would be. Viji says, I didn't even realise there was an insect till I checked it when I got home. April says, too bad, Viji, you could have got a great macro. Susan says, lots of variety, love this variety of fuchsia, reminds me of a ballerina. Yeah, there is that kind of feeling to it, isn't there? Okay, so, but what Viji has run into here is quite a common problem, which is we see a flower, maybe we love the smell, we love the colours, it's really grabbing us. We're seeing it in 3 dimensions. We've got a sense of how vibrant it is. But then when we take the photo, it just seems to fall flat. And we've all had this problem a lot. I almost challenge anybody to say they've never had a problem with this. But the key thing here is light. And the clue that you've given away is the fact that you said it was a dull grey day. And the dull grey day isn't allowing for the glorious colours of the fuchsia to really come through, to shine. And sometimes, depending on how you want to play with the light, you might have a bit of sunlight falling on it. You might have sunlight, a dappled sunlight, because it's coming through the leaves. You might move the camera around and take shots from behind or getting bits of glint. And there's lots of things you can do if there's some, nice, bright sunlight about. Most flowers tend to kind of glow that extra bit. When the light hits it, many of the petals are translucent. So they capture the light, and the light moves through flower petals in a way that's different than if, say, this was carved out of clay or plasticine or something or something. So light is your absolute best friend when it comes to photographing flowers. Even if you're doing a still life at home. If you take a look at, Susan's still life, some of the ones that she's done, she very carefully angles the light. She's using false lighting at home, but she's angling the light to make sure that it's really capturing the petals and you're getting a sense of depth. The problem with the all-round, overall dull grey day is that the light almost sort of saps the colour out. And what it does is, because it's not a hard light, it's a very, very soft light, the shadows mean that your kind of sense of three-dimensionality, your texture, disappears. And then the colour gets sapped as well. So what to do about this? Now, there's a limit to what you can actually do in terms of trying to fix it in post-production. I mean, if I go to, let's just open this up in Photocrowd. Okay, let's just close Robert's photo there. And okay, let's just do a quick crop. And as you say, slightly, I would want, well, I'd almost want to kind of take this, move this slightly more center, even angle it slightly. Perhaps, not sure, quite like a little bit more diagonal in that, something like that. It's just for quickness sake, let's just do content aware fill. That should be fine. And then hit enter. So just, yeah, that feels slightly better to me as a crop. Now the question is then about what you can do with the color. And you see, even if I take this and I boost and I, let's see, let's open this in camera raw filter. Let's say we bring up the play with the contrast a little bit more. The problem is, again, especially when you get into the reds, pink ends of things, when you start playing with the contrast, it tends to lose detail quite a lot. We can go to the effects and boost the clarity. We're trying to get more texture, but we're losing the color. It's kind of a bit of a mess, really. It's very, very difficult to really boost this. If we just go back to normal here, take that clarity back down to normal. If I go to the color and I boost the vibrance, it just gets a bit sickly. Likewise with saturation, we just lose any sense of detail when we start to oversaturate. Interestingly, if I bring it down though, maybe we start to get a little bit more detail. And herein then, Viji, I think lies the clue as to what to do if you're on a dull day. In a way, you can't try and rise to the challenge if you think there's something interesting you can get done with the flowers. But my feeling tends to be, go black and white. What's interesting about the flower here isn't just the colour, it's also the shape. I mean, Susan's ballerina comment. And so, but what we're getting distracted by here is the fact that there's a pink fuchsia colour. That's dull. And we can't boost it or without it just kind of becoming insipid or just not really working. So let's flip this. Let's go for what about shape and tone? And in this case, if we go black and white, okay, that's not huge in itself, but we've made a start. I can go to the black and white mixer. Now, if I take the reds, see, there's a lot of options here, but I can, or if I want to make it lighter or I want to make it slightly darker. The oranges, now that seems to be affecting the white part of the flag. Let's come in a little bit closer so where we can see the detail. We've got to be careful here because you'll also notice if I go too far, it becomes a bit quite noisy. But we could nudge that slightly. Yellows, not a lot happening in the yellows. Greens, they'll be more further out. Those greens practically disappear, or we can bring those greens in and make them quite a bit darker. So I'll maybe nudge those down a little bit because that's almost kind of vignetting it. Aquas, nothing happening there. Blues, a little bit in the background, I wouldn't worry about that. Purples, nothing there. Magenta, okay, now you see the magenta is interacting. We've got the red and we've got the magenta. Let's just move in a little bit closer here. And the magenta is bringing out these kind of lighter textures, which is interesting. So you see this, we're just nudging this up and we get a little bit more texture here. Now we compare that to the red. If you nudge the reds down a fraction and the magentas up a fraction, then we're actually getting a lot more texture starting to come out in this fuchsia. And I think that's looking a bit more interesting. Now let's flick back to the light and we go contrast. And you could really contrast it. Now that's overkilling it, but actually that kind of contrast I think is quite interesting. It's making these a bit darker, but we're still keeping, because of that magenta boost, we're still keeping texture here. It's darkening down the background, darkening down the leaves a little bit. I can see over on the histogram, let's just pull this over here. there's a, you can see there's a gap on the right here. So we could maybe up the exposure a little bit, not too much though. Let's take those highlights down. I don't know, I'll maybe come back to that. I'm going to do something else, I think, because I don't, but I quite like something like that. And at that point, we could even go to the clarity and nudge. Okay, careful about, yeah, just nudge that clarity a little bit, something like that. And now we can see we've gone from the fuchsia, it's pink, it's pretty, but it's not as pretty as it could be. When we look at it, we're kind of looking at and thinking about the photo it could have been. However, when we look at it in black and white, now it's all about the texture and the tone and the tonal contrasts. We're no longer getting distracted by the fact that the pink isn't what we wanted it to be. We're seeing it in terms of its relation between these, well, we've now created darker petals. As you can see, we could have created lighter petals, but because we're contrasting with the kind of the whiteness of the flower inside, we're wanting to have this sort of darker against the light. We've managed to darken the greens a little bit, so we've got that kind of pattern around it as well. And now I think we're kind of really onto something. And I think this is quite a fun, interesting photo then in its own right. Okay, so although fuchsias are generally about the pink, I think whenever you are playing around with flowers and it's a dull grey day, think about the fact that you have options in black and white. Black and white are really where you can explore tone and texture and light. And I think the same thing then would happen with the other one. So if we go to here again, let's open this one with Photoshop. Again, there's a little bit too much of a crop here. I might just kind of pull this in a little bit, something like that. Yeah, it feels a little bit too far over. Again, okay, let's do something a little bit like that, and I'll just do the generative expand, just again so that we've got a composition that we're slightly happier with, if it's ever going to get there. Can never really tell with the generative expand. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, any of these would do. Let's just go with that one, doesn't really matter. Now I've got actually that little bit of extra white there. I might just, let's go back to background default and maybe just bring that up a little bit. Don't need quite as much at the bottom. Okay, now again, I think what we could do is take this and again put it in black and white. Now actually, I'll tell you what I can do. I can just do Control F. No, not Control F. Alt F. No, not Alt F. Should be another one. Okay, just filter Alt Control F. That's I knew it was one of those. Now, Alt Control F all in one go, which is just repeating the last command you did. That's killing it, okay? Because we don't have the contrast of the white part, like the petticoats of the ballet dancer, this is just now too dark. So what we could do though, is at the same time, let's go back into filter, camera raw filter. We can, actually, because it doesn't have the plants giving it a natural vignette, we can vignette it in a bit. But let's go to black and white. Okay, now it's all kind of one color, but what we did notice though was that the magenta and the red gave us different options. So again, if I take the red here, I can lighten or darken, and if I take the magentas, it sort of hits the highlights, and I quite like that. If I take that up for the highlights, then I can take the reds down a little bit, even. What else have we got? The oranges. Oh, even the orange. Oh, now the orange is interesting. The orange is kind of creating, is hitting into a deeper bit of the shadow, and we're getting so much more texture into that. In fact, I could just bring those reds up a fraction. We allow the oranges to bring down those lines in it, which are barely noticeable in the color tension. And then we're using the magentas to create a highlight. And now we've got a much richer kind of contrast. So if I then, let's bring the exposure up a little bit. I could even no, I don't want to boost the contrast too much. Let's go, actually, I'll tell you what, let's go to the clarity tool and then just emphasize those textures that little bit more. A touch more on the vignette, maybe, something like that. And so now I think that becomes a bit more interesting again. So again, if we go from, we've got the fuchsias here, that on all round pink, there's no, the gradation between the darker part and the lighter part of the petals aren't as obvious. Whereas because we've managed to boost and darken very specific colour strands, the oranges through to the magentas via the red in that, we've actually managed to sort of separate them out and actually really create much more texture in the black and white than there was in the colour. So with that in mind, I mean, of the two of them, I think I probably still prefer this one. I think this is a more interesting shot because it's got much more in the way of shape as well. But that's not to say that this one hasn't become a more interesting version, I think, than the original dull grey. So with that in mind then, Viji, I think hopefully that gives you a few thoughts and ideas. So to summarise this idea then is, if you are on a dull day and the colour is being sapped out of whatever it is you're photographing, but it does quite often apply to flowers, where the colour is usually the thing that is the bit that's drawing your eye, but the camera just isn't capturing it, then think black and white. Think about the way you can take the tones and adjust them. And hopefully then keep black and white as an option for playing around in the editing afterwards. Key thing here though as well, just a wee reminder, don't take photos in with the black and white settings on your camera. I've done several podcasts on this before and shortened bits within the podcast before now about converting to black and white. As you can see, we were able to manipulate individual colour strands in black and white in order to get the texture we wanted. If you set your camera to shooting in black and white, it makes a decision for you, and then you can't go back and make those changes, not unless you've got the original raw file as well. Okay, so never shoot in black and white, even if you intend to print and display in black and white. Always shoot in colour so you have maximum options available to you for that conversion. Right, okay, so where are we? So Meg says absolutely beautiful. Marilyn says lovely. Viji says I have the urge to turn the flower to turn the flower to see the insect's face. Never seen something like that. Yeah, that'd be kind of fun if we haven't got to the point of 3D photos yet, not out of a single lens camera. April says you have to look out for more of those insects, Viji. See if you can find another. Viji also goes, yes, there is character in that black and white version. Good tips, thank you. John says, I like to put the black side of a reflector behind the flower to help it pop. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's another option as well, which is, if you, yes, there's a certain point there where if you have got the flower against a white background, the white is already very bright, and the colour, if the colour isn't popping because the sun's hitting it, then the white itself has the potential of almost it's drawing too much attention away from the colour of the flower. Sometimes colour can work well against white, but you've kind of got to get at the balance. John's point is actually to have a bit of black behind it. Now, sometimes, I mean, Susan knows this about the idea of using like black card she'll take and even out onto a shoot. You've got a nice piece of black card. You can put some reflectors, a 5-in-1 reflector often has a black option to it. You can take that, you can place that behind it, and that too will allow the colour to pop against it. But if there isn't enough light on it to really bring out the translucency, you'll still be potentially running into the problem. But the black background can help. That's a good point there, John. Thank you. Right, okay, so thank you very much to both Robert and Viji for sending in images. I hope you found that useful. Now, okay, so let's just talk a quick bit about the next couple of weeks. So next week then, which will be the 25th of May, there's not going to be a podcast. And that's because next week is Spring Fling. Now, Spring Fling in southwest Scotland is this major event where this year I think there's about 80 different artists across the region are opening up their studios. Now, for the last few years I've been taking part in this. This year I decided not to. I'm taking a year out. But Maggie is taking part in it. Maggie's studio will be open. She's in Kakubri, and well worth going. You can go and see Maggie's artwork in the flesh, see it up close. Way better than any of the photos I've ever been able to take. I'm not a product photographer, but even the best photo never truly does justice to Maggie's paintings. The richness of the texture and the colours and the subtleties are absolutely best seen close up. So if you are anywhere near Southwest Scotland, go along to Maggie's studio. If you want to know more about Spring Fling, just type in, if you want to type into Google, Spring Fling Open Studios Scotland. That will get you there, or otherwise it's spring-fling.co.uk, and that will show you all the studios that are open, plus there are little maps to show you where different studios are located across the region. Now, although I'm not going to be in Spring Fling, it does mean that this week it's all hands on deck to try and help Maggie get her studio ready. It means I don't have a lot of time to prepare for next weekend, and also, to be honest, I really like going around and seeing the studios. Most years I'm in Spring Fling, so I don't get a chance to see any others, so I'm absolutely making the most of it this year. And Meg and I, while Maggie's in Spring Fling welcoming visitors, Meg and I will be going in the car, driving around the region, visiting various artists, stopping off for cups of coffee, and generally having a fun time. So that means no podcast next Sunday on the 25th of May. What it does mean, though, is that the following week, which is the 1st of June, that's when we are having our light and shadow, or shadow and light photo challenge. Go back, check the last podcast, episode 241, if you want to find out more about that, or go to the Facebook group or the Flickr group. Read them off the screen here, where there's more information about the challenge. So what I need you to do is get your images to me, creative use of shadow and light, and there's all sorts of ways you can interpret that, from the way objects are casting shadows, to the way shadows are falling on the object, to the way of even the shape of the shadows themselves independent of the subject. All these kind of things. Loads and loads of information in episode 241. Go back, it's all menued up as well if you just want to skip to particular sections to check on that. Get your images to me, well, if you've got ones already, send them to me now. Otherwise, send them to me early next week. Absolutely no later than Friday the 30th of May. I need a couple of days to be able to get everything together for these podcasts. So try and get your image in before that. And of course, like I say, you'll get a bonus 10 smug points if you submit an image for it. And I will also be figuring out my favourites for a bonus 30, 20 and 10 extra smug points. Maybe even a couple of commended, who knows. Right, okay, so I think that pretty much brings us to an end. Thank you ever so much to everybody here for leaving a comment. You will get your 5 smug points for that. And thank you to Robert in Texas and to Viji in Chennai in India for sending in your images. And I hope everybody feels like they've learned something from the feedback and critique on those. And I won't see you next week, but I will see you in a fortnight, or I'll catch up with you on the Facebook group or the the Flickr group, or for that matter, I'm on Instagram as well if you want to come and find me there. Okay, take care. Enjoy yourselves. Bye-bye.